Last Thursday at 12:14 a.m., you sat on the edge of the bed rereading the same 3 messages, waiting for the typing bubble that never came, and your chest tightened because your body already knew what your mind was still trying not to name. And there is a reason a man can treat a woman like an option that has almost nothing to do with her beauty or value and almost everything to do with a pattern of shame, pursuit, easy access, and emotional cowardice that you can start breaking tonight. She kept telling herself he was just overwhelmed, work was heavy, his phone was weird, his family was complicated, men shut down sometimes, people get scared when things get real. So she did what so many good women do when they are slowly being starved of clarity. She became generous in the exact place where generosity was being used against her. She answered fast. She stayed soft. She gave context before he asked for it. When he disappeared for 2 days and came back with a lazy late night, "You up?" She responded like a woman trying to preserve connection instead of a woman measuring effort. And each time she made that choice, something small inside her started to split. Not because she was weak, because the soul knows when it is being negotiated down. The heartbreak was not only that he was inconsistent. The deeper wound was that she was starting to help him do it. She was editing her standards in real time so she would not lose the possibility of him. She was calling scraps a phase. She was calling confusion chemistry. She was calling the ache in her ribs hope. So why do you stay? Because leaving a bad pattern can feel more terrifying than enduring it when your nervous system has attached survival to one person finally choosing you. That is the part people miss. You were never just waiting for a text. You were waiting for relief. You were waiting for proof that the story in your head was wrong, that you were not too much, not forgettable, not easy to put down and pick back up. Brene Brown's work on shame says it with ruthless clarity. Shame is the fear of disconnection, the fear that if people really see the truth of you, they will leave. So tonight, before you send one more message, trying to sound lighter, cooler, easier, write down 3 facts and 3 fantasies. The facts are what he actually did. The fantasies are what you keep hoping those actions secretly mean. That one page will start pulling you out of the spell. Because a woman in shame does not evaluate, she auditions. She starts performing low maintenance, sexy patience, spiritual understanding, all while her needs are quietly bleeding out on the floor. And the man who benefits from that does not always look cruel. Sometimes he looks confused. Sometimes he looks wounded. Sometimes he even looks sincere for 15 beautiful minutes on a Sunday afternoon. But sincerity without consistency is still instability. Stay with this because the next line is the one that changes the room. The first pain you have to stop fearing is not the pain of losing him, but the pain of seeing him clearly. Once that pain becomes bearable, your life changes. She learned that the hard way on a Monday night when he finally called after going silent, and within 10 seconds she could hear it. No apology, no ownership, just the familiar soft tone that made everything sound almost meaningful. And she almost melted again, not because the call was deep, but because attention after deprivation can feel like love to a deprived mind. That is why your first move cannot be emotional. It has to be observational. You do not need a bigger heart tonight. You need cleaner vision. If a man can feel you slipping and only then remembers your existence, that is not connection. That is access management. And yes, that stings. Good. Let it sting. Pain that tells the truth is not your enemy. She used to think the worst part was his distance, but it was not. The worst part was what happened inside her during the distance. She stopped eating when the silence got long. She picked up her phone before her eyes were even open. She replayed old conversations like courtroom evidence, searching for the exact moment she became too serious, too available, too emotional, too honest. Then when he finally pulled back in, she felt the rush, warmth, relief, oxygen, almost gratitude. That swing is not random. Attachment theory gives it a name: attachment anxiety, that crawling feeling that if he pulls away, you must close the gap immediately or you will be abandoned. And on the other side of that dance sits attachment avoidance, the pattern where closeness starts to feel like pressure. So distance becomes the person's version of control. When those two patterns meet, one chases for safety and the other withdraws for space. And both people end up proving each other's deepest fears. The anxious one thinks, see, people leave. The avoidant one thinks, see, closeness traps me. So what looks like a love story is often just a wound finding its favorite costume. The woman in this pattern becomes incredibly intuitive about his moods and completely disconnected from her own. She can tell by his punctuation whether he is drifting. She can feel a shift in one dry sentence. She can detect danger in a delayed heart emoji. But ask her what she needs, what pace feels safe, what treatment she will no longer normalize. And suddenly the room gets quiet. What if he leaves? He may. But that question has kept too many women kneeling at the altar of almost. Here is where most women get this completely wrong. They think the answer is to become less emotional. It is not. The answer is to become less emergency-based. Your feelings are not the problem. Your panic management is. When attachment research describes anxious behavior, it is not mocking you. It is describing what happens when the body believes love is unstable and starts treating distance like danger. So tonight, when the urge comes to send the second text, then the clarifying text, then the joking text to make the second one look less needy, do one thing first. Put the phone face down for 20 minutes and regulate your body before you touch the story. Walk outside. Rinse your wrists in cold water. Sit on the kitchen floor if you need to. Breathe until the feeling moves from emergency to information. Because if you answer from the first surge, you are not speaking from self-respect. You are speaking from threat. And threat always over-explains. Threat always bargains. Threat always says yes to crumbs because crumbs feel better than the terror of an empty plate. She started to see this when she noticed how often she was calling it intuition when it was really hypervigilance. She was not reading his soul. She was scanning for danger. That matters because once you name it, you stop romanticizing it. You stop saying, we just have such intense chemistry. Sometimes what you are calling chemistry is simply an activated nervous system meeting inconsistency. Sometimes the butterflies are alarms. And this is the part no one talks about. If a man learns that your fear will always move you toward him, he never has to examine what his distance does to you. He just has to wait. Wait for your softness. Wait for your paragraph. Wait for your excuse making. Wait for your empathy to arrive and clean up the mess he made. That is why the shift has to happen in the smallest possible place first. Not in some grand speech, not in a dramatic goodbye, in one delayed reply, in one unsent paragraph, in one night where you let confusion stay unanswered. That is how the pattern starts losing oxygen. She said she knew it was unhealthy, but every time she decided she was done, he would do something tiny and perfectly timed. A check-in, a memory, a voice note with that tired tenderness in it, one song, one been thinking about you, one little drop of warmth into a desert. And suddenly all the starvation became invisible again. This is where a lot of women accuse themselves of being pathetic, and that only buries them deeper. Because what holds you in a hot-cold dynamic is not weakness. It is reinforcement, doctor. Ramani's work keeps returning to this pattern in toxic bonds. Intermittent reinforcement, the cycle where affection is delivered unpredictably, and unpredictability makes the reward feel even more powerful. In plain language, the brain gets hooked not because the love is deep, but because the reward is uncertain. So tonight, mute the thread, archive the conversation, and stop letting his name function like a slot machine in your pocket. You do not need more willpower until the stimulus changes. And yes, that sounds small. It is not. Because uncertainty is a drug when you are lonely enough. That is why a woman can spend 6 hours thinking about a man she does not even fully like. Not because he is extraordinary, but because the loop is open. The brain hates open loops. It wants closure, contact, prediction. And when contact comes randomly, the mind starts assigning meaning far beyond the actual behavior. One late night compliment suddenly outweighs 3 weeks of emotional neglect. One intense look in person suddenly erases days of absence. One carefully timed return makes you think, maybe this is the turning point. But consistency is not supposed to feel like a turning point. Consistency is supposed to feel almost boring in its reliability. So why does chaos feel so magnetic? because chaos keeps you occupied. Chaos gives the mind a problem to solve. Chaos lets you confuse activity with intimacy. If you are always decoding, anticipating, recovering, hoping, then you never have to sit with the quieter grief. The grief that he may simply like access to you more than he values responsibility to you. Sit with that one for a second. Not because it is cruel, because it is clean. And clean pain heals faster than dirty hope. Stay with me because the next line is the one that most women resist. When a man gives you just enough to keep you from leaving, but never enough to let you relax, the issue is not whether he has feelings. The issue is that his feelings are not organized into care. And you cannot build a safe life on potential energy. She began to wake up when she saw how the whole relationship lived on anticipation. The best part was always before the date, before the text, before the call, before the promise had to become a pattern. Anticipation was the romance. Reality was the letdown. That is not intimacy. That is stimulus. And this is where you take your power back in a way that feels almost invisible from the outside. Stop rewarding confusion with access. Stop turning your availability into emotional life support for a man who only reaches when he feels your absence. If he sends a vague late-night message, do not answer in bed under dim light with your loneliness in charge. Answer the next day if you want, in daylight, from your standards, after breakfast, after your life has touched you first. One line, no performance, no rescue energy, no midnight softness for inconsistent men. If this kind of midnight truth helps you hold the line, subscribe quietly now and come back to it when your standards start getting blurry again. Because what breaks most women is not one bad man, it is one repeated pattern. She did not need another theory after that. She needed proof, so she tested it. She stopped answering fast. She stopped making herself emotionally available on demand. And something strange happened. His effort did not rise into maturity. It rose into anxiety. Suddenly he noticed. Suddenly he checked in. Suddenly he asked if everything was okay. That is when it hits you. He was never confused by your value. He was calmed by your predictability. She had spent months believing that if she could just be a little more understanding, a little less intense, a little more in her feminine, a little more patient, he would finally feel safe enough to show up. But what she was really doing was removing every consequence from inconsistency. Esther Perel's work circles one hard paradox again and again. Love wants closeness, but desire also needs separateness. If intimacy collapses into fusion, attraction starts to suffocate. So tonight, reclaim one pocket of mystery by protecting a part of your evening that no longer belongs to waiting. Make dinner, leave your phone in another room, take the walk, read the chapter, go to the gym, call the friend, and let him experience one full night where your attention is not laying on the table like free bread. This is not a game. Games are manipulative because they are still organized around him. This is a return. This is you taking your life out of orbit around an unpredictable source. And yes, there is a difference. A game says, let him miss you so he chases. A return says, let him feel the reality of reduced access while you remember you exist outside this loop. That difference matters because one is strategy and one is dignity. What if he thinks you are being cold? Let him think. A woman who has over-explained herself for too long will mistake simple boundaries for cruelty. But adults do not need your constant warmth to remain respectful. If the only version of you he can stay connected to is the endlessly available one, then he is not attached to you. He is attached to convenience. Here is where the chapter turns. The pain he feels later will not come from you becoming mean. It will come from you becoming unavailable to disrespect in the exact ways he counted on. She saw it when she stopped offering emotional girlfriend labor to a man still acting like a hesitant tourist. No more therapy sessions over text. No more midnight validation. No more it's okay, take your time, when what she really meant was, please choose me. The room changed. Because men often become most reflective at the point where access stops being assumed. Not all men, not every time. But enough times that women mistake the pattern for destiny. They say, he only came alive when I detached. Not exactly. He came alive when the structure changed. When the emotional electricity he took for granted was no longer running through the house, he had to notice the dark. And this is the part no one talks about. Your overavailability can make your value emotionally invisible. Not because you lack value, but because what is always present and always forgiving is easy for an immature person to treat like background. Stay with me because the next line may sting. When you make abandonment impossible, appreciation becomes optional. That is why the counterintuitive move is not to love less. It is to stop cushioning every impact for someone who keeps dropping the glass. She learned to say less, not as punishment, as calibration. When he came with vagueness, she met it with clarity. When he came at midnight, she answered at noon. When he came with emotional fog, she did not volunteer a weather report of her heart. She let silence do some work. She let absence reveal what words had been hiding. And in that silence, two things became visible. The first was his actual level of effort. The second was how much of the relationship she had been carrying alone. Both discoveries hurt. Both were gifts. Because if your peace disappears every time you stop performing connection, then what you had was never connection. It was maintenance. And maintenance done by one person always becomes grief. She asked him one ordinary question. Not a dramatic one, not an accusation, not some long emotional ambush. Just a plain question a woman in a healthy bond should be able to ask without fear. Where are we going with this? And he did not answer with truth. He answered with disappearance. Hours turned into a day, then two, then a little half-hearted return as if nothing had happened. That kind of silence does something brutal to the body because it forces you to carry both the hurt and the uncertainty at the same time. John Gottman's research on conflict says stonewalling often happens when someone feels flooded and shuts down. But the silent treatment literature goes further, when the silence is deliberate and prolonged. It describes it as a form of relational ostracism, being ignored in a bond where you should be able to exist. So tonight, if a man goes silent after a reasonable request for clarity, send one clean line and then stop. Silence is an answer, and I'm going to treat it like one. If you want to speak with clarity and respect, you know where to find me. Then put the phone away and do not reopen the case at 11:30 p.m. with loneliness acting as your attorney. Because this is the boundary most women skip. They think power is in the perfect final paragraph. It is not. Power is in ending your participation in a setup that keeps turning your needs into inconveniences. But what if he really is overwhelmed? Then a grounded adult can say that. A grounded adult can ask for a day, ask for space, name a timeline, return with accountability. What destabilizes you is not space. It is unstructured silence. It is disappearance without language. It is being expected to absorb emotional impact with no explanation and then receive him gently when he returns. That is not emotional maturity. That is outsourcing regulation. Here is where most women get this completely wrong. They think the pain he feels later will come from them, finally telling him everything he did wrong. No. Men who live behind avoidance often go numb inside speeches. They defend, they delay, they reinterpret. But consequences reach places arguments never do. The felt absence of your warmth, the missing immediate why apply, the realization that he no longer has easy emotional entry. That is where the lesson starts landing. Not because you are punishing him, because reality finally is. And now, the line worth screenshotting, he did not treat you like an option because you were too much. He treated you like an option because your availability kept teaching him he could. Tonight's micro action is simple, and it takes less than 30 seconds. Open your notes app and write this exact boundary before you are emotional enough to improvise it badly. I'm no longer doing inconsistent communication. If you want to talk, reach out with clarity during the day. I won't be responding to late night check-ins or half conversations anymore. Save it. Do not send it in the surge. If he reaches tonight, wait until tomorrow after 2 p.m., read the message once, and either send that line exactly or send nothing at all if silence already told the truth. That pause matters, because a boundary sent from panic becomes a plea. A boundary sent from steadiness becomes a structure, and the structure is the whole point. She did this once and spent the next hour shaking. Not because it was wrong, but because self-respect feels unfamiliar when you have been trained to self-abandon. That shaking is not a sign to reverse course. It is withdrawal from the old role. Let it pass. Drink water. Walk. Call a friend who loves the version of you that does not beg. Do not check if he saw it. Do not narrate it on social media. Do not turn a sacred shift into a performance. Quiet is powerful here. Quiet lets the new pattern root. Quiet lets him feel what the old pattern kept muting. And if he comes back offended by the boundary instead of responsive to it, you have your answer without another detective board on your kitchen table. She thought the ending would look dramatic. One final betrayal, one last cruel sentence, one clean snap where the fantasy broke and she became instantly free. But most real endings are quieter than that. They happen when a woman gets tired in a more honest way. Tired of reading tone. Tired of bargaining against obviousness. Tired of trying to turn potential into behavior. Tired of waking up already emotionally behind. And in that tiredness, something steadier begins. Not rage, not revenge. A return to her own center. Brene Brown's work on belonging keeps coming back to a fierce truth. Real belonging does not require you to betray yourself in order to stay connected. So tonight, do one belonging act before bed that has nothing to do with him. Put clean sheets on the bed. Charge your phone across the room. Delete the draft you were about to send. Set out your clothes for the morning. Write one sentence that begins with, "A woman who respects herself no longer," and finish it without trying to sound poetic. That is how identity comes back. Not in one blazing speech. In ordinary self-honoring moves repeated until they become familiar. Will he feel the pain? Maybe. Often he does, just later than you wanted, and in a language you cannot monitor. He feels it when the emotional faucet stops turning on at will. He feels it when your energy is no longer available to soften his emptiness on demand. He feels it when your name is no longer guaranteed to light up in response to his convenience. He feels it when the woman he thought would remain psychologically nearby has moved her furniture back into her own house. But this matters. You cannot make his pain the project, or you will still be living by his nervous system. The point is not to engineer longing. The point is to stop financing disrespect. If longing happens for him, let life teach it. Your work is smaller and harder to become a woman who no longer needs delayed validation to feel real. Stay with this last part because it is the quiet return. There may be a night soon when he does reach out and the old electricity will flicker through your hands. You will feel the ancient urge to respond quickly, warmly, graciously, to show him you were never really gone. When that happens, do not shame yourself. Just notice it. Place your hand on your chest. Feel how familiar the pull is. Then ask one clean question. Does answering this preserve my peace or reopen my wound? Let the body answer before the fantasy does. And if the answer is wound, bless the part of you that wants contact and choose peace anyway. That is adulthood. That is healing. That is what changes the sleep you get tonight. Because the woman who keeps choosing herself in small, private ways becomes unmanageable to anyone who only knew how to love her casually. She becomes clear. She becomes expensive in the best possible way. She becomes hard to confuse, not because she got colder, but because she got congruent. And congruence is what unstable dynamics cannot feed on. So if this found you tonight, save it for the night you need it again. And if it did, there's another one waiting for you about what happens in his mind the moment you stop texting back.